Hey, what's up? It's Bon. Let's talk about Mass Effect. If you like Mass Effect, if you like video games, and you like video game news and speculation and reviews, all of that stuff, please subscribe to the channel. We're getting close to 2,000 subs. We're getting close to getting verified and partnered and getting all of that fun stuff with YouTube. Please help me out. I'd really appreciate it. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you have a question, comment, thought, or you just want to say hello, do that in the comments down below. Today, we are going to be talking about Mass Effect, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking in. I'm going to talk about everything that we know about the next game, and that breaks down into a few silos. I look at information about the next game as what we know for a fact, what we can do educated speculation on, and then pure and wild speculation with just hopium and copium. We won't be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about what we know, what we can do some educated speculation on. But first, I want to talk about anything that has come up more recently. I've done videos like this before. I believe the last one was around N7 Day. We haven't gotten a ton of info directly about Mass Effect since N7 Day, but what we have gotten is a lot of BioWare updates. So let's hit those first, then we'll talk about what we know about the next game, which isn't very much, and then we'll do some speculation. So let's get into what we've been hearing lately, what the more recent news has been. And it's not with Mass Effect, it's actually with Dragon Age Dreadwolf. If you're aware of this project, I would hope you are. If you're even if you're a Mass Effect fan, I imagine you're still somewhat in tune with BioWare in general, and you would know that Dragon Age Dreadwolf is a game that has been in development for a really long time. We are under the impression it's essentially been rebooted a few times. It went from being a live service multiplayer game a few years ago to being converted to a more traditional single player BioWare style game. The most recent news came around the end of March, beginning of April, finding out that Mark Dara, who is formerly a creative director and pretty highfalutin guy at BioWare, who left, I believe, in 2021, or beginning of 2022, and he's returning as a contractor, as a consultant. He's not going back full time, but the impression is that he is coming back, as this article states, to help them finish up Dragon Age Dreadwolf. That is pretty notable because he didn't leave for no reason. He's talked about it in his own videos on his own YouTube, as well as I believe on my podcast when I did a interview with him, that he did everything he could do at BioWare and kind of wanted a new start. And it seems like he's kind of doing that. And it seems like he's mostly doing consulting now. So him returning is interesting because it probably means a few things. It probably means that they're missing some kind of experience or something he brings, that he probably got paid a bunch of money, and that they're probably in the final stages of the game. I can't imagine they'd be bringing him in the middle of development. We've been hearing that they hit alpha stage, in the later parts of 2022, and even Mark Dara himself in his own videos talked about how Inquisition went from alpha to release in 6 months, but that he didn't expect that for Dreadwolf. But he seemed fairly confident, and this was before he was consulting, that Dreadwolf would be out before the end of 2024. There was also reporting from someone named Jeff Grubb, who's a gaming insider and has pretty accurate EA information, that he said the targets were late 2024 for Dreadwolf, maybe or late 2023, maybe into early 2024. That's kind of changed because along with this Mark Dara information, we got this information that at least some of the Mass Effect team are helping finish out Dreadwolf. That's significant if you're listening to this video or watching it because you're a Mass Effect fan, I assume. And the Mass Effect team currently is a pre-production team as far as we know. We aren't under the impression they are in full production of that game yet, which means that the Mass Effect team is already relatively small. I don't know the exacts. I haven't gotten any inside info. I would imagine the Mass Effect team is between 30 and 50 people currently, and that may even be a high estimate. So, even if they take away 5 people from that team, or 10 or 20 to go work on Dreadwolf, that is significant for Mass Effect. Anyways, the more recent information has been that the release window now for Dragon Age Dreadwolf is probably mid 2024. Jeff Grubb being the main one. Again, he's pretty accurate with his EA information. It seems like he especially has good contacts there, and especially at BioWare. So, take that for what you will, whatever you think that means. And that's okay. I know I have gone on the record a few times saying that I'm curious about Dreadwolf. I personally will play it, but I'm not like dying to have it. My main motivation for Dreadwolf to come out is knowing that then they can shift full production and a big focus to Mass Effect, to that next game that we're talking about. So what does this mean? Where are we at? We'll talk about that. I do want to point out that there has been one relatively recent update when it comes to BioWare in general. They put out a blog in February of 2023, earlier this year, which had kept them on a cadence of some relatively large info dumps every 3 or 4 months. And this one was a big, and I suggest you go read it yourself if you're just curious about game development, because this was a fairly in-depth look into some of the systems and stuff they're working on for Dreadwolf. Now, what I think is somewhat notable is that we haven't heard anything since this. Nothing official besides when we got this info about Mark Dara, the Mass Effect team, and then this more recent information from just a few days ago that we probably won't be seeing Dreadwolf at any of the summer shows, and that we probably won't hear anything about it actually until 2024. At least that's the thought. So we haven't gotten any blogs since then. That made me think that maybe we would get something this summer, and maybe we will, but all indications are that we won't. Really, the only information we've got more recently is if you pay attention to some of the BioWare developers and stuff like that, you will see there's one especially who I believe is the creative director, who is fairly often talking about, like, today my only job is to play our game. And you can take from that what you will. When the game hit alpha stages last year, they were claiming it was playable from start to finish. Now, that can be a bit misleading if you don't understand game development, how alphas and betas and all that work. It was probably that should always come along with it was probably technically playable from beginning to end. It may have even been content complete to a point where it has like all of the missions and all of the big beats in it. But you're also talking about a game that probably didn't have finished textures, animations, voice acting, mechanic balancing, and all of that stuff. Which is when you see Mark Dara coming back, when you see the Mass Effect team helping out, is probably what they're helping with, is all of that fine tuning, bug fixing, things like that. And seeing it getting pushed out basically to a year from now is interesting, because when you heard Mark Dara talk about when the alpha got announced, that Inquisition came out 6 months later, and that he expected Dreadwolf to maybe come out within a year of that alpha announcement, which would be this fall or late summer. It is odd that we're looking at a whole nother year. So it suggests that maybe there's more serious issues, or maybe they had something that they wanted to add that they realize they have time now. Maybe EA said, hey, take your time. We're seeing games like Tears of the Kingdom do so well after they took an extra year to just tighten the game up. The developer of Tears of the Kingdom said that they could have released that game, or that it was finished a year before it came out, but that they spent an entire year just working on bug fixes and things like that. I don't know if EA is willing to do that. Nintendo is kind of a unicorn in this industry, but it is still a possibility. And so it's really interesting, because my gut and some of the things I've seen from their developers and stuff like that still makes me think there's a chance the game is coming earlier than we're being told. But then you have people like Jeff Grubb, who are pretty reliable, especially when it comes to this. And we have EA itself put out a basically a thing to its shareholders saying, here's what we're releasing this fiscal year. And nowhere did it even indicate a possibility of Dreadwolf. The way it works out is it shows like their live service games that are ongoing, the games that have come out or are coming out, like Jedi Survivor, and like I think it's like their PGA game, their sports games, all of that. And there wasn't anything being like, and maybe one more. Where when we saw Ubisoft recently did the same thing, their shareholders got a document showing all the games that are coming out for them. And in that list was a spot specifically that said, and one more large game. And now people are thinking it's probably Ubisoft Star Wars game. We didn't get that with EA. It doesn't mean it can't change. I believe even on EA's document, it says, they're not legally binded or held to these projections. Now that typically is in case games get delayed, not necessarily because they'd be announced to come out earlier than we thought, but who knows? So I would say those are all like the biggest updates that we've gotten, and then we can get into, what do we know about the next Mass Effect? And it's not much. So I want to first pull up this blog from 2020, and this was after the Game Awards happened that year. So 2020's N7 Day was actually fairly reserved. I believe that was where they announced the Legendary Edition that eventually came out in 2021. But I think the only things we can say that we know about the next Mass Effect came from this, and this is where they showed the infamous trailer. If I remember, I'll overlay it here, and you can see some of the footage as I talk. But there's a trailer they put out in 2020 at the Game Awards that was basically confirming, saying, hey, the next Mass Effect is coming. It was literally called Mass Effect. Mass Effect will continue was the big tagline, and it showed, it opened up to the Andromeda and the Milky Way galaxy, and the camera dives into the Milky Way galaxy. We hear a bunch of radio comms and stuff from the history of spaceflight in our real world, as well as we start hearing things from the trilogy, and we hear Reaper noises. We hear even some stuff from Andromeda, and one of the most notable things of this trailer is that we heard them say Arc 6 has launched, which was new information to all of us, because as far as we know from the Andromeda game, there were only 5 arcs. Without getting into the weeds too much, it then goes and shows a ship flying past a moon and flying to a planet. We see a figure walking up a dead Reaper covered in snow, with a dead Reaper in the background silhouetted by the sun or whatever, stars in that system. Then we see a shard of an N7 helmet in the snow, and we see someone pick it up with, I believe I can't remember if they had gloves or if it was their hand. They hold it up. They have a hood. The hood comes back, or we see the person's face, and it's Liara. And there is a ship with some figures that are not easily identifiable in the background. And she smiles, and we get this big, awesome music score, and it says Mass Effect will continue. So at this point, there's a few things that we can, I think, say we know about the next game, and this isn't really new. It seems like Liara is involved. It seems like it takes place after the Reaper War, and I think that's all we can say without going into even educated speculation, right? And so it's fairly simple. There. Now, when we get into educated speculation, this comes into my opinion, and this isn't fact. This all could change. Maybe it was a fact back when they made that trailer. Maybe it's not now. But it seems like there's more we can get into. But the one thing I will say before we get into that is that we know that Casey Hudson came back in 2018 to BioWare, and then he left again. I believe it was in 2020 or early 2021. That was when Dara left as well. And what it seems like, and from a recent Mac Walters interview, is I get the impression that that was a time when Hudson came back and probably was helping them to set the future of their franchises, especially Mass Effect. And all the while knowing, and I'm sure it wasn't a big secret, that Hudson was beginning his own studio, which we know now is Humanoid Studios, which is like mostly staffed by BioWare people, or at least a large amount of them are. And it seems like, my guess is that he was setting the stage for the future of the franchise. Then he left. this trailer came out, and we've gotten what we've gotten since. So all I think we know about the next game is that Liara is probably involved, and it's after the Reaper War. Beyond that, it's all guesses. So since then, we've gotten another N7 Day in 2021. And while they didn't give us a ton of info here, there was one fairly significant thing that they showed. It actually wasn't even on this, but it is a poster basically that they put out. You can actually see it over my head right here, and it's of a crater at the top of this picture, and you see some bodies laying around it that appear to be dead Geth. Some people have speculated they're dead Quarians as well. I'm not positive, but it seems likely. And then down at the bottom there is a ship, and I believe the ship has the SFX designation on it, which was actually the code name for the first Mass Effect. And there are 4 figures walking north from the ship towards the crater. One of the figures is clearly a Krogan in red battle armor. Then it gets into the weeds. You have people who think that another figure is Ryder from Andromeda, where I actually think that figure, it's in the middle. I think it's a Turian. And then you have another figure in the front that I think most people think is Liara or an Asari. And then you have, I believe, another one that looks like it might be a Solarian. I'd have to look at it again. Anyways, the biggest thing about this poster, and you may even be able to see it in the background, is that the whole poster is a not very vague reference to the crater looks like a Geth. The whole thing looks like a Geth. And to me, with educated speculation, this suggested to me that in some capacity in the next game, we're going to be addressing that the Geth will be involved. Now, combined with what we saw in the trailer from 2020, where you saw these dead Reapers, that led a lot of people to believe that, well, maybe they're going to canonize the Destroy ending. But then this poster comes out with a Geth on it, and some people have been like, oh no, that means the Geth are still alive. And like, all we see are dead Geth in the picture. So what it suggests to me, and this is the educated speculation thing, is that they may be suggesting that the Geth will be involved, but maybe the events of the Destroy ending will be canonized, and trying to find a way to bring back the Geth, or finding some way to maybe to bring them back for maybe their help in the fight against the Reapers and things like that, or in a race to reestablish AI in the Milky Way galaxy for a power advantage, is something I have suggested as well. Past that, we have also gotten the N7 Day from 2022. This ended up being relatively significant. Even as I scroll through here, all of the art in this appears to be concept art from the next game, except for one photo, which I'll point out. But what we did find out was, or we at least had confirmed a few of the directors on the game. Mike Gamble being the project director, Danielle Enns being the senior development director. This is notable because when this N7 Day happened, that job was still listed as open, and after this show, or after this announcement, that listing went away. And that was the very last Mass Effect position that BioWare has had on their hiring website. A really notable hire that we found out about, I believe, early in 2022, was that Mary DeMarley, came over to take over the narrative director job on the next Mass Effect. She's notable for the Deus Ex games, as well as the most recent Guardians of the Galaxy game, which was excellent. And many people, including myself, felt like that was the closest thing we've gotten to like a Mass Effect feeling game since the trilogy, or maybe Andromeda if you count that. And then we also found out that Parrish Lay is the franchise creative director. Parrish Lay's been around since the original trilogy. I believe was a cinematic director in some of the trilogy games, and has been around for a good time. They did some Sims announcements. This art here was actually the one bit of art I believe is from the trilogy. This was from a loading screen in Mass Effect 3. We do see this here. This was the background of this art. Shows the Citadel around a planetary body. If you know anything about the trilogy, there are no planets in the nebula that the Citadel was in during the entire events of the trilogy. So this, in my opinion, is the first art we've seen showing the Citadel probably in the Sol system, and more than likely orbiting Earth, and that's probably the moon. We also got, there's a little bit of art here, which some people, including myself, have suggested that maybe this is Ilium, because we see one of the signature Ilium domes in this Asari kind of style architecture. And then finally was this picture, and it's actually a video if you download it, where we see this, what looks like some type of relay being constructed. It has the designation MR7. This also appears to be updated art from a very old art book at this point, and this is a slightly modified version of that. It definitely looks a lot different. We have a bunch of ships around here, and this has obviously led to a bunch of speculation on its own, but there was also kind of a garbled audio along with this, which people deciphered and found it was Liara speaking to an unknown person. Some people speculated it's Geth. I don't think so. I think that's too easy of an answer. But she basically says something along the lines of the Citadel should realize that humans are really stubborn, and that they're going to be furious about something humans are doing, or is it at least what it suggested. Now there's dates in here, there's all kinds of stuff here that have, you know, people speculating pretty hard. I won't go too hard into that in this video because it's already fairly long, but what I have suggested is that I feel like a lot of what we've seen so far when it comes to seeing like some of the ships and some of the technology and stuff like that, and even a date in this very picture here that's down here in the bottom left, my educated speculation, or maybe this is pure speculation depending on how you look at it, is that they are teasing that this game will take place probably not too long after 3, while things are still being rebuilt and you know, power vacuums are still being filled and things like that, which could lead to kind of a fun political thriller when it comes to story and things like that. Now, since then, we haven't really heard much. And as I wrap up this video, the main things that we've seen or heard have basically been the news that I spoke about at the beginning of the video. Mike Gamble does a bunch of teasing. I would say the biggest topic, or one of the more interesting things that we will be kind of waiting to find out, is that, in my opinion, everything we've seen so far has suggested that the next game is probably going to take place shortly after Mass Effect 3, is probably going to be Milky Way focused, is potentially going to canonize the Destroy ending, and that kind of seems like it's it. Now, a big factor that is worth considering is that Mike Gamble, the project director, who I pointed out before, has been not very stealthy or vague about saying like, hey, Andromeda isn't going to be forgotten, and it's led people to speculate lots of things, and it's pure speculation that some people think this next game might be the direct sequel to Andromeda. I think that's the least likely, but who knows. Or that maybe the game is going to take place so much later after Mass Effect 3 that they could find a way to bring the Andromeda and the Milky Way galaxies together using some type of tech from the Remnant, or some kind of Reaper tech, or something with the Geth and their relay telescope thing, or something. Who knows? We can get into the weeds. I've done videos on that stuff. We won't get into that yet. I'm kind of waiting until this year's N7 Day to see what they tease us with this time. I was hoping for something this summer. It doesn't look like we're going to get it. So, in this 20+ minute video, what I would glean from this is that the most recent stuff is, it seems like the Mass Effect game, when it comes out, is going to be very dependent on what happens with Dreadwolf, because we don't believe they're going to go into full production on Mass Effect until Dreadwolf comes out. So if Dreadwolf comes out in mid 2024, we're probably looking at a 2, but more than likely 3-year full production development cycle on Mass Effect, which would maybe start by the end of 2024. So to me, I would say my most up-to-date speculation on when that game is most likely able to come out is late 2026 or early 2027. My previous, my most recent predictions were like 2023 or 2025 potentially. I'm starting to think that's less and less likely. Games have been made extremely quickly before. We just found out about Anthem, that they made it in like 18 months from beginning to end. Now, we don't want the next Mass Effect to be Anthem or even Andromeda, but It all just comes down to the pre-production. And the one thing I think Mass Effect fans can, I think, take solace in is that it seems like pre-production on this next Mass Effect has probably been going on since 2018 or 19. And so at this point, that would put it at a 4 to 5 year pre-production cycle, which is pretty healthy. And they have all these directors in place. It seems like everything's in place. So while it seems like Dreadwolf is kind of a mess, it sort of seems like Mass Effect is doing everything the right way. And maybe that could lead to a particularly short development cycle. There are all these rumors that the next Mass Effect is probably on Unreal Engine 5, which is being lauded for how easy it is to all of its production pipelines are really efficient and have lots of tools that make it easier and faster and better. So maybe we are looking at a shorter production cycle for this next Mass Effect. Maybe the next Mass Effect isn't going to be the biggest game ever. Maybe it'll be a scaled down experience that they can make in 18 months or 2 years. We're going to have to wait and see. That's all wild speculation. But I think at this point, if I had to put money on it, I would say like late 2026 is when I would put money on the next Mass Effect coming out. It could definitely go later. It could maybe be earlier, but we'll just have to wait and see. So if you're still around and you've listened to this really long video, which is almost a short podcast, I really appreciate it. I think all this stuff is fun to talk about. I think it's interesting to get into. It's something I'm going to keep doing over the next couple of years, while we get more info and more in 7 days and hopefully more information than that. But it's all for fun. I'm not trying to get hopes up. I'm keeping my expectations reasonable, but I am still excited. I still have some hype for this. Obviously, we'll be playing our Starfields and all of our other games while we wait for this one, and hopefully our Dreadwolf sooner than later. And that's what we're going to do. And I'll keep doing these videos. I imagine I'll do another one of these in November after N7 Day, or maybe right before. Maybe I'll try to milk some views from you all. So, and maybe we'll have more info by then. We'll have to wait and see. So that's all I have for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like Mass Effect, if you like video games, news, speculation, all of that stuff, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video if you did. If you have any comments or questions or thoughts, or you just want to say hi, please put those down in the comments below. You can find me all over the internet as Bondiesel on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, most places. And you can listen to my weekly news and speculation podcast called The EchoCast, which is on all podcast platforms and right here on this YouTube. And you can check that out. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.